In the absence of constant scrolling, constant noise, constant stimulation, there was space for real connection. And it made me realize something that's hard to say because it's addiction and whatnot, but our phones might seem harmless, but they often steal a lot of those moments where friendship actually grows. My wife and I just got back from a marriage retreat, and we realized something that was honestly a little bit uncomfortable to admit. See, at some point over the last few years, we stopped really being friends. And not in a dramatic way. Like nothing was wrong. We weren't fighting all the time or anything like that. We were good partners. We were raising our daughter together. Life was moving forward. But the friendship part of our marriage had slowly faded into the background. And this marriage retreat helped us see that really clearly. So, this retreat is something that our church does every year. There were about a 60 couples there. So, about 120 people total, and it's a weekend retreat. So technically it's 3 days, 2 nights, but the last day is basically breakfast and everybody goes home. So we usually head out the night before and sleep in our own bed. But the retreat itself was out in the middle of nowhere in the mountains, like way out in the desert outside of San Diego. Just dirt hills, rocks, shrubs, coyotes, like nothing for miles, nothing glamorous at all. But honestly, that simplicity was kind of the point. So they brought in a guest speaker. Our pastor spoke as well. And the very first session introduced this idea that really stuck with me. He said, every healthy marriage needs three things growing, three buckets: friendship, partnership, and romance. And he referenced research from people like John Gottman and others who study relationships. The idea is pretty simple. Your marriage isn't just one thing. It's actually three dynamics happening at the same time. And friendship is the part where you actually like each other. You talk, you laugh, you share things. Partnership is the logistics of life, raising kids, managing the house, supporting each other's work. And then romance is the attraction, the affection, the intimacy. And he said something that stuck with me. If those buckets aren't growing, your marriage isn't staying the same, it's slowly dying. In other words, if you're not growing, you're dying. If it's not getting better, it's getting worse. There is no maintenance mode. And sitting there listening to that, I realized something. My wife and I were doing pretty well in two of those buckets, right? So partnership, solid. Romance, still there. But friendship, that one had gotten pretty thin. And honestly, I think that this happens a lot with people like me. I'm very much metric driven. I like measurable progress. Like I've done an Ironman. And when you're training for something like that, you know if you're improving, right? You're faster, you can go longer, your endurance improves, you track your VO2 max and all your stats. And you're like, oh, it's getting better or it's getting worse. And you can make adjustments. Same thing with business. If revenue grows or the company runs better without you, that's progress. There's a scoreboard. But marriage doesn't really work that way. And that was challenging for me. There isn't a clear dashboard that tells you how you're doing. See, I mean, there's a person that does. They'll tell you if they're doing great or not. But success is more about maintaining connection than achieving something. In fact, there's this really great book about infinite games. You talk about there's two different types of games that we play in life. One is a finite game where there is a finish line, there is a definitive end. If you're running a marathon, you know when you have reached that status as a marathon runner. When I did my Ironman, I crossed the finish line and became an Ironman. It's over, right? I've done the thing. But then there are infinite games, things that you cannot win. The entire goal of it is to stay in the game, is to keep going, right? So I live with type 1 diabetes. You can't win type 1 diabetes. You can't beat it. It's an autoimmune condition where I am insulin dependent, and in the absence of insulin, I die, right? So you can't win. And marriage is like that too. You don't win marriage. The goal is to stay married, to keep going. It's an infinite game. And because of that, I've realized I tend to drift towards things where progress is easier to measure. Training, building the business. Those things reward effort in obvious ways. See, marriage is much quieter, which also means it can drift a lot easier, right? And somewhere along the way, without realizing, I think I had kind of put our marriage into maintenance mode. And the first night of that retreat is when that really started to change. We had dinner and we went straight into the first presentation. And that's where the three buckets conversation happened of friendship, partnership, romance. And afterward, couples had time to talk privately, kind of reconnect and talk about the weekend ahead, right? And reflect on that first message. And that's when I opened up about some things I hadn't really talked about before to my wife, not to everybody else. And for me, just some insecurities from childhood, some vulnerabilities I've carried for a long time, and how those things might have shaped how I show up in our relationship. It wasn't easy to talk about. My wife, amazing. She was fighting her tired eyes. She's trying to stay awake. It's 11 o'clock at night, and I'm like, just going, right? I'm like, I'm in a space to share right now. And she was trying her hardest, and she was doing a good job listening. But that conversation created a space where we could reconnect again, not as parents, not as people managing responsibilities, just as two people being honest with each other. And that felt like the beginning of the friendship coming back. Right? Another interesting thing happened actually during the retreat was how much phones normally interrupt connection. My wife and I both mentioned that after the fact. Uh, we got back home and I went to my phone, pulled up a text, and she was like, "Hey, I felt disconnected just now. Like that's really interesting. How you went to your phone and I felt like you weren't here with me anymore." Like, huh? Because at this retreat, phones they weren't banned. We had service and internet, but it was discouraged, kind of by default. Nothing direct of like, don't use them or we're gonna kick you out. It's just like, be present with each other. But we both kind of decided not to use them much. I checked my blood sugars on it with my type 1 diabetes and whatnot, but I'll be honest, it was harder than I expected at first. The first night, my wife mentioned that her instinct was to grab her phone and scroll social media during a quiet moment. It's just a habit. It's something I realized I do the same thing. If I'm eating alone for breakfast, typically, I'll usually just scroll while I eat, hop on TikTok or Instagram. So there was this moment where both of us noticed that temptation, that default, right? But we didn't pick up the phone. And once we got past that first moment, something shifted. There was this quiet space, this peace. And we didn't even realize how much we had been missing until the retreat was over. The next day, we went a little deeper. And at one point, we walked outside and sat on the bench looking at the mountains during one of these reflection moments. Everybody go chat with your spouse and discuss, reflect, that sort of stuff. And I was like, let's just sit and stare at nature. And she was like, well, it's hot. It was like 93 degrees that day. I was like, let's go in the shade. Okay, we'll keep the temperature cool, but like, let's just look at the mountains. Just desert hills stretching out for miles. And we just sat there and talked about friendship, about how it faded, about how to intentionally bring it back. And for me personally, being out there in nature was refreshing in a way I didn't expect. I mean, I've always liked nature. I guess I didn't think it was that absent in my life. See, there are days in my normal routines where I barely see the sun. I go to my office, I work all day, and then I go put my daughter to bed. And then I go to bed, right? So being outside, breathing fresh air, looking at open space, it slowed everything down. In fact, I just finished this really good book. If you're somebody who also likes to fill every minute of their time, I go from meeting to meeting to meeting. And then the little gap I have for lunch, I get my workout in and then back to meetings. And man, this book, it's called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. Man, checked me. Just gut check. Oh, yep, I do that. All right, I should probably slow down. Fantastic read if you haven't read it yet. And the entire concept is basically, what are you rushing for? Like, what's at the end? Death? Why are you in a hurry to get to death? Slow down, enjoy, be present. Like, man, that's a good point. So read that if you haven't yet. But around that same time, something from our marriage counseling started making more sense too. We've been seeing a counselor for about 6 months now. And not because our marriage was falling apart, but because we want to invest in it intentionally, get ahead of any problems we might encounter, right? And a couple weeks before this retreat, our counselor, he told me something that stuck. He said, I asked him, I was like, what are some actionable things that I can do? Because I'm looking for metrics, right? I'm like, yeah, we're talking about relationships. Like, what's my homework? What am I supposed to do here? And he said, the reason And I told him, I was like, don't go light. Just give it to me direct. Like I got to know what's going on. What am I not seeing? What's my ignorance? He said the reason I sometimes get heated in conversations isn't necessarily relationship stress. It's work stress showing up in my relationship. I was like, I asked you to be direct. Okay, I'll take this. Go on. My baseline stress from work had been running high for months, and I was bringing that stress home without realizing it and blaming my wife for being extra critical with her. So my job lately has been learning to separate those two things: work stress, relationship stress, because most of the time our relationship actually wasn't the problem. Looking back, one of the biggest gifts from that weekend was something we didn't even fully notice until after we got home: peace. Peace. In the absence of constant scrolling, constant noise, constant stimulation, there was space for real connection. And it made me realize something that's hard to say because it's addiction and whatnot, but our phones might seem harmless, but they often steal a lot of those moments where friendship actually grows. And we're intentional around our daughter. We're like, hey, don't be on your phone when you're talking to her because she needs to see you and be present with you. But then we ignore that rule for ourselves within our marriage. I'm like, it applies to every relationship. It's not just to your kids, right? So the big lesson I'm walking away with, pretty simple. Check the buckets: friendship, partnership, romance. Most couples are decent partners. They're running the household, raising kids, doing the logistics of life, getting it done, checklist items, progress and metrics. But friendship is often the first thing that disappears when life gets busy. And a lot of times life gets busy with our phones. We fill the moments, we fill boredom with it, and all of a sudden life feels busy, don't have time for connection, or at least real connection. And when that bucket runs low, everything else eventually feels harder too. For me personally, I'm realizing that building a business, training for an Ironman, chasing big goals, those things are actually easier in some ways because progress and momentum is obvious. Marriage requires something different: this presence, this intentionality, friendship, right? And if that bucket stays full, the other two usually take care of themselves, at least in my experience. Now, I am not speaking about this from expertise or like I fixed it. I'm just getting started with this and recognizing how important it is for me to prioritize these things. And I mean, let me know how this one resonates with you too. If it hits on one of the core four that I go over with my private higher achiever clients every week. We talk about the different areas in life that you need to prioritize and how to make progress in those roles. And even though the metrics are harder to track, it doesn't mean that it's not worth prioritizing. Because if it isn't growing, it's dying. Your attention is how you vote on what's truly important. And that, for me, was the wake up call that I needed. Now, I hope this helped. And if you like self improvement and setting yourself up for success in the areas of life that truly matter, you'll like the next video that I'll put on screen right here. I'll see you in the next one.